Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the December edition of our SIS educational series, where we all get together to learn a little bit more about Dynamics SL. Today's edition is year-end closing for Dynamics SL. And this is Dan Franklin with SIS. Let me tell you a little bit about our company, SIS, in case you don't know us. We were founded in 1996. Our headquarters in Duluth, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. And we deliver business solutions that help project and service-driven companies unify business processes and applications across the enterprise, delivering better visibility and efficiency. What we do at SIS, we are your Dynamics SL partner. We can do all full circle of services, including current state assessment, business process analysis. We can do requirements and fit gap. We also do software design development and deployment, including custom applications. We work with both ERP and CRM implementations. We can also do rapid deployments where we have multiple locations to roll out. And we work with both on-premise and cloud deployments. Benefits of working with us? Well, we're a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We have over 20 years, actually getting close to over 25 years of experience serving Dynamics SL customers. We have a dedicated support and customer care team. There's our 800 number right there. We have a very experienced partner consulting and development team. Everybody that works here at SIS has been working with Dynamics SL for at least 10 years, and most of us more than 20 years. We understand your industry best practices in the software in order to bridge the gap between business and technology. Our broad industry-focused solution offering for Dynamics SL, CRM, and D365 plus SharePoint. We focus on project-based companies, and our industry-focused solution is built for companies like yourselves that are project-based. So for the webinar, make sure that you have your screen maximized for this GoToWebinar, and that might make things a little bit easier to see. If you have any technical difficulties, please email Eric, and he will help you navigate the GoToWebinar. All your phone lines are muted, so you don't have to worry we can't hear you. Please hold all your questions until the end, and we will have a Q&A session. We'd be happy to answer your questions. And we're going to be recording the webinar, so just in case you need to go back and hear something again, we will publish a link to the recorded webinar shortly after the end of the webinar. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our speaker, Melanie Brindisi with Plumline Consulting, and she is the resident expert on the year-end updates. She's going to go through what's new this year and talk about what versions of the product you can still apply the year-end updates. Okay, take it away, Melanie. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. We'll be looking at year-end processing and a lot of information regarding that, as well as some closing procedures and such in Dynamics SL today. Year-end processing topics will cover the payroll module, as well as project controller and accounts payable module as well. So Microsoft will be providing the year-end updates in the following SL versions. This will include SL 2018, 2018 CU1, 2018 CU2, as well as CU3. And then for SL 2015, it'll be the base version, as well as CU1 and CU2. We'll begin with the application of the year-end updates that are provided by Microsoft. The first step is to download the updates via the Microsoft Customer Source or Partner Source website. This site does require valid credentials to access the download, so please be aware of that. If you do not have access, you may contact Microsoft directly or contact your partner to assist with getting that access that you need. Once on the website, then, you're going to want to select the Dynamics SL product line and locate the year-end updates download. Typically, it's going to be found under the SL Service Packs area. You may also search on just Dynamics SL 2019 year-end updates, and it'll typically pop up in the search results there as well. You'll install via the instructions that are included within the downloaded zip file. Make sure that you are following the instructions for your specific version of Dynamics SL. Be cautious of that. Sometimes those instructions will differ slightly depending upon the SL version. In prior years, Microsoft has been known to sometimes release a YouTube video walking you through the instructions step by step for applying these. I'm not sure if they're going to do that this year or not, but if you're looking for some assistance on installing those on your own and need a little extra guidance, you might go out and search for that. The updates are not yet available, so those will typically come out sometime here in December, hopefully before too much longer. We want to make sure that all users exit SL before you apply the updates. You want to back up your SL system and application databases, as well as any custom reports within your SL installation. As I said, the updates are not yet available. So as far as the exact installation steps are concerned, I don't have those. But just basing it on the steps that we've used to install the year-end updates in prior years, typically you want to make sure you install it directly at the server versus at a workstation. And then you will locate the directory for your version within the download, and then run the installation executable, which will copy new screens and or reports to the necessary folders. Those are typically the AP, payroll, and GL folders, or the two-letter abbreviations for each of those. In the past, there's also been a script that you would run in SQL against the databases for specific versions. So just pay attention, be sure to give extra caution that you're getting the instructions for your exact version that you're applying the updates for, and any specific steps for that version. Now you might be wondering what updates are included in these year-end updates that we speak of. Just generally speaking, it's going to include any current year reports, any year-end resolutions, so any changes that need to be done to make sure processing and reports are correct. Also, any electronic file changes and or any 1099 form changes. Also, any changes to the W-2s. Now, this year is a big year for updates. As a lot of you are probably aware of, there's changes to the W-4 form specifically that has a lot of people with questions regarding what's coming with these year-end updates and how Dynamics SL is going to accommodate these changes. So information I have, and this is subject to change just because I said, Microsoft has not yet released these, but what we have at the moment is the W-2 form changes. There's a box 9, the verification code, that is no longer in use. So that field on the form will have the title removed, and that box will become shaded. There are no changes to the W-3 form, and that's your totaling page with the W-2. The W-2 electronic file, there were no changes required for that. A lot of it is simply around changes with the new W-2 or W-4 form, and how SL is going to accommodate those changes. So with that, there's some additional filing statuses that will be used to accommodate higher withholdings. So we have support for the new 2020 tax tables, which will include the standard set of tables as well as a higher set of tables. There's 4 new ones with that. There's also, and those 4 new tables will be included with the December 2019 quarterly tax updates. So that's another key piece to these year-end updates, as you're probably familiar with, and I'll touch on here in a little bit later slide. We've got the year-end updates, and then we also have tax table updates that are published separately, and that will be the case. These year-end updates are going to be dependent on these tax table updates being loaded as well. We have a new dependent claim amount field that's being added to SL screen, and that is taken into consideration during the payroll calculation as well. And also, I believe it was on the employee maintenance screen itself. There's a message that's going to be added to advise the payroll clerk on correct number of personal exemptions to enter and which set of tax tables to use, whether it's those standard or higher withholding tables, based on the selections made by the employee on the new W-4 form. So that's the information as I have it right now. We will continue on here. It is recommended that the year-end updates be applied after you have closed the payroll module for the year. As I mentioned, there's the year-end update and then also a separate tax table update that's released by Microsoft. The tax table updates for 2020 year should be applied after the payroll module has been closed for the current 2019 year. The year-end updates include the information previously discussed, while the tax table updates provide changes to the tax tables used by the payroll deduction. So we're going to also include those 4 new tables for the higher rate that I mentioned as well. There can be a few different releases of the tax table updates over the course of the year as the tax tables change. My last search in customer source, I believe, showed that there was the last tax table download was available on 9/30 of 19, and that had to do with a Virginia tax rate change, I believe. So, but again, look for the one coming out as of December 2019, which should be hopefully coming soon. And I'm hoping it will likely be released around the same time as the year-end updates. Typically, they're staggered a little bit, but because they're dependent upon one another this year, I'm hoping they come out at the same time. There are a few items to take into consideration as you're working on your year-end processing in SL. You're required to do the calendar year processing in payroll and AP even if you're on a fiscal year setup. Also, you can post entries to prior periods as needed, even if they are closed periods. Be aware that your setup must allow for such postings to closed periods and years. So there are some setup options surrounding this in the General Ledger setup screen of your General Ledger module that can restrict users' ability to post to closed periods and years. There could also be third-party add-ons installed on top of Dynamics SL that could impact the ability to post back to closed periods and years as well. The W-2 and 1099 amounts are updated based on check date. Just something to keep in mind as you're reviewing numbers. You may have noticed on my earlier slide that the year-end updates provided by Microsoft are available for the SL 2015 and 2018 versions. If you still happen to be running on an SL 2011 version, Plumline Consulting is offering a year-end package for the SL 2011 SP1, 2011 SP2, and SP3 versions as an annual subscription. This will contain all of the same year-end updates that are released for the 2015 and 2018 versions. It's just recreated and packaged for these 2011 versions. If you'd like some more specific details on the solutions, feel free to contact dpv@sisn.com for more information. The pricing for the annual subscription is if you have under 100 employees/vendors, it's $1,500. Over 100 employees/vendors, it's $2,500. Please note, if you are on SL 2015, this is the last year that year-end updates will be included in your maintenance with Microsoft. So just a note there again, this is the last year that SL 2015 versions will be included in the year-end updates provided by Microsoft with the maintenance. Moving on to the payroll module now. The typical flow for year-end processing in the payroll module includes closing the year for payroll in the GL closing screen, reconciling the 941 and unemployment reports, printing the W-2s to plain paper to review the calculated amounts, editing the W-2 data as needed, which would be done in the employee W-2 history screen in initialized mode, printing the W-2s, and also generating the electronic file. We'll go ahead and visit these items in a little bit more detail. First, you'll want to confirm that all the data for 2019 has been entered and processed. We'll review the payroll batch register report to make sure all batches have been released and posted. Reconcile your payroll accounts in payroll with the general ledger account balances. So you can use the account distribution and GL trial balance reports. Those are good ones to assist with that sort of process. You'll want to print any period end reports, such as the 941 quarterly tax worksheet, your unemployment tax worksheet, and the earnings and deductions report. At this point then, you're ready to do the year-end closing in the payroll module. This is done in the closing screen within the general ledger module. The December period of your fiscal year will always be closed with the closing type of year, not period. So whichever period corresponds to December in your fiscal year is going to be the one that you do that closing type of year. Closing will cycle the payroll to the new calendar year for you. It will also create deductions for the new year and history records for the prior year. This allows you to calculate checks then when you get into the new calendar year. If this is not done and you try to calculate checks for the new year, messages will be received stating that deductions do not yet exist. So that's your indicator. Make sure that you clear all calculations in payroll before closing the year, because this can cause errors in the new year too if they're left out there. An important note that I want to reiterate is that you must close the payroll before you can run calculations in the new year. So here's a screenshot of the closing screen itself. You'll see the year option on the payroll module is selected, and then you would click Begin Processing. If you do happen to make an invalid selection, maybe I accidentally select the closing type of period as opposed to year, the system will alert you. It'll give you a pop-up message on screen, simply a warning just indicating that it's an improper closing type, and it will not allow you to proceed without making the proper selection. On my system here, period 12 happens to be my December period, and hence I would choose year. If you're on a fiscal year that does not match up to a calendar year, whichever period corresponds to December, that when you reach that period, that's when you would make the closing type of year. Here we have a high-level overview for the W-2 steps for year-end processing. We'll go into each of these in more detail next. So first, the year-end updates are applied. Then the W-2s are calculated. The data on the W-2 forms would be reviewed to make sure that the information contained on them is accurate. You would want to make any edits or corrections as needed to those. The W-2 forms would get printed. And lastly would be the creation of the electronic file if you're filing electronically. Now, once the year-end updates have been applied, you're ready to move forward with doing the W-2 calculations. We would open the W-2 calculation screen in the payroll module, choose the current W-2 year, select the pay groups that you wish to calculate the W-2s for. In my screenshot here, I've entered the calendar year of 2019. You put in the Social Security wage limit. Your pay groups in the top right corner, you would select the pay groups that you wish to calculate the W-2s for. The employees that are included in the selected pay groups will fill the employee grid on the bottom half of the screen. You would select the selected checkbox for those that you wish to calculate the W-2s for and click Begin Processing. After you click Begin Processing, it's going to populate the tables needed to print the W-2 forms and create the electronic file. Let's take a deeper look at reviewing the data and calculations. So once that calculation has been completed, you can print the forms to review the data for each employee. You can print to file and maybe open it up in Word or print it to plain paper so you can review those amounts before you use up your forms. You could print using the plain paper copy format, which will print the boxes for you. You could also use the W-2 employee history screen to review the data that was calculated for each individual employee. So you're able to bring up that employee for the designated year and review what the numbers are. So this is useful in troubleshooting as well. Now, as far as correcting W-2s, If you happen to determine that corrections need to be made to the W-2s, we'll first want to try to determine what is causing it to be incorrect. There are several potential causes for this sort of situation. If the federal wages appear to be incorrect, I would suggest you review the following items. These include identifying any earnings types that may be set up incorrectly, identifying any missing exemptions that might exist. If any such items are found, you would want to correct the setup and then rerun the W-2 calculation process and review those amounts again. Now, if the state wages are what appear incorrect, we would review these items. It includes identifying earnings types that may be set up incorrectly, identifying any missing exemptions that should exist, and if any of these items are found, we have a couple options for resolving. One would be to use initialize mode to correct the year-to-date subject wages in the employee history screen so that they're correct, and then you would rerun the W-2 calculation process. Or you could use initialize mode to correct the state wages in employee W-2 history. However, you do not want to recalculate the W-2s in that scenario. Continuing on, if a tax amount is found to be incorrect, we would want to take a look and see is the issue with the federal, state, or local taxes. Make sure that your federal deductions are properly coded as a type of federal in the deduction maintenance screen. You'd also want to make sure that any of your state deductions are properly coded as a type of state in deduction maintenance screen, and also that the appropriate two-letter state code is included there. Lastly, make sure that any of your local taxes are coded as a type of local, and the appropriate two-letter state code is entered there as well in the deduction maintenance. Now, for tax amounts that were not taken properly, you can initialize the tax amounts to be correct. Some important notes to remember, though. It is key that we correct setup issues to avoid problems in the following year. You want to be careful when using initialize mode to modify the employee history screen. Just be very careful in doing these sorts of things. If you have any doubt, reach out to your partner or Microsoft support to determine if that's the best approach in resolving it. Here are some items to make note of with the W-2 calculations. That process of calculating the W-2s can be run at any time. You can do it before or after the year-end close has been completed, just as long as history is being retained for the year you wish to calculate for. And typically we recommend going ahead and calculating the W-2s before the year is over, just to test the numbers out and allow you to start to get a feel for how things are shaping up to be. The W-2s can be recalculated after the last check of the year has been ran then. If you have inactive employees who have earnings and deductions for the W-2 year, those can be included in the calculation and printed as well. If an earnings type or deduction amount is to be printed in a specific box number on the W-2s, you'll want to use the W-2 control tab of the earnings type maintenance screen or the deduction maintenance screen to indicate that box number and or letter. And remember, if the calendar year has been closed already, it will be necessary to use the deduction history screen versus the deduction maintenance screen to access and modify the record for the prior year for it to impact that year's W-2s. If the employee W-2 history screen is used to modify W-2 information using initialize mode and the W-2 calculation process is ran after that, then all previous changes will be overwritten. If you would like to keep those changes intact, be sure to click on the option off to the right to protect edited W-2 information. You want to check that option before you rerun the calculation process. That'll make sure those initialized changes remain for you. If you happen to be missing a state employer ID, you can go into the deduction maintenance screen on the W-2 control tab and populate that there. If you happen to be missing the federal employer ID, that derives from the company maintenance screen. The W-2 Forms report within the Payroll module is used to print the W-2s. SL does not have the copy 1 and 2 report formats, but you can use the copy D instead. And SL uses a standard 2-part form, and it also offers a 4-part or 4-up format as well. I believe that came about starting back in SL 2011 version, so it's been around for a while now. Continuing on, you can obtain pre-printed forms from a company called Deluxe. They have been providing these forms for years when they do line up quite nicely with the SL W-2 forms. You can also print your own forms using the copy A, B, C, and D formats. These formats are referred to as the plain paper copies and will print with the boxes as well as the numbers for you. Copy A is the federal copy and must be in the scannable red ink. Copies B, C, and D are not required to be in that red ink, though. Creating the electronic file. We would use the Generate W-2 electronic file screen to create the file that you would then provide to the IRS with your W-2 information when filing electronically. You need to populate the required fields, which are simply the calendar year. You would specify the path to the file that will be created, and you can change the file path. So if there's somewhere you're more familiar with on your network that you want to save it to, your desktop or a designated directory, you can change that. Just make note of where the file is being created so you can reference it later. You would also supply the transmitter PIN number, which is provided by the SSA. And then also you must fill in some contact person information. So if there's questions, they have someone to reach out to. The company identification fields will default from the company maintenance screen in Dynamics SL, but they can also be overridden on the screen directly when you're generating the file. Now, once you hit the Begin Processing button, it's going to create a file called IRS tax.001, and this will be the file which you can open it in Notepad that's provided to the IRS. You want to follow the instructions that are provided by SSA for transmitting that file. The file format itself that's produced by SL. It's usable by a program called AccuWage. And AccuWage is free software that's provided by SSA to check the electronic file for formatting accuracy. It will identify common format errors in the wage submissions, and it will help greatly reduce submission rejections. Now, it could also possibly be rejected for other errors. It does not verify names or social security numbers, for example. Moving on to the Project Controller module. The steps for year-end processing in Project Controller will include making sure all the data has been entered for the current period and that all of their modules have been closed for the current period in the General Ledger closing screen. So it's too easy to make a mistake when you're doing your allocations, your billing, approving time, running the GL labor posting. Say, for example, you have time cards that have not been approved and will not post to the new period, regardless of what period they have in week maintenance. So just to help with these sorts of things, it's recommended you make sure the following items have been reviewed and processed as needed before running the closing in Project Controller. We want to review time cards. We want to complete the following processes, including labor commitment load, the GL labor posting, the pay labor interface. We want to review expense reports, run the FTT process, complete the revenue recognition and allocation processor, execute the billing transactions load, complete invoicing, and then at that point you're set to close the period. Now the project module must be closed at the end of each fiscal period. Closing can be ran for the fiscal period or year end. This is somewhat similar to what we have in the General Ledger closing screen, but Project Controller has its own screen. This is the close period screen. This screen will perform a set of control tests. It will check that all submodules have posted to the project. that the accounting modules are closed to any additional entries, that all the project charge batches are posted, and then if any exception is notified, the closing will be blocked. So time cards are reviewed, and a warning message appears containing the number of unposted items being carried forward. Now, sometimes the closing screen will present warnings. If that's the case, these items will not prevent you from closing the period or year. However, if there's errors versus warnings, those types of items will prevent you from proceeding with the close. If the close period screen detects that the current period is also the last period of the fiscal year, the title of the Begin Processing button changes to Begin Year-End Close, and it will close the year. If a year-end close takes place, balance forward amounts are calculated for those projects that have their balance forward switch on, and summary records are written then for the new year. Here we have the close period screen. As I mentioned, the system will detect for you. It's not like the GL closing screen where we have to make the appropriate selection, whether it be period or year. This screen will detect automatically for us. So if your current period in this example is 11, next period would be 12. The processing button at the bottom says Begin Processing. If the system, however, detects that the current period is 12, the end of my fiscal year, and the next period is 1 of 2020, the button at the bottom then changes to Begin Year-End Close. So it's more automated in the Project Controller module, but just be aware if you do happen to see that different button, it's detecting automatically for you whether it's a month or a year-end close. Now, prior to processing the closing, it's important to review the project maintenance records for open projects. Any open projects that should have their balance carried forward should have the balance forward at year-end option selected. Balance forward at year-end determines whether the year-end total of a project's budget and actuals are rolled forward as the beginning balance for the coming year during the year-end closing process. Projects that span multiple fiscal years should have this checkbox selected so that those ending balances are rolled forward to the next year. For any annual projects or those that are budgeted each year without regard to previous years, this checkbox should be clear so that the beginning balance is set to 0 for the next year. If the year is closed and some projects were not marked as balance forward, the balances can be corrected by changing the current period in the Project Controller Setup screen. You would set that back to the last period of the previous year, and then you would make sure to mark the balance forward option in Project Maintenance, and then you can run the closing process again. The Project Controller gives us a little flexibility in being able to do that. In Project Controller, you want to make sure you review the fiscal period maintenance screen to set up the fiscal periods for the new year. And also in time and expense, we would review the week maintenance screen to set up the week ending dates for the new year. Moving on to accounts payable and 1099 processing. Here we have an overview of the steps for year-end processing and accounts payable. We want to review open AP files. We would print the AP batch register report and review the statuses of batches. You want to look for any batches that may need to be processed. Post-transactions in the GL post-transaction screen. You can print the vendor period trial balance and the period-sensitive aged AP report. Those two reports are ones that do allow you to go back to different periods. If you run just vendor trial balance or the standard aging report, where it only runs for the current period. So that's why we recommend vendor period trial balance and period sensitive aged AP report. You would want to tie those to the general ledger trial balance report and confirm the recurring entries that you have set up, that those have been generated, you've got those released and posted to the general ledger as well. You can print the check register report and aged AP report, and then go ahead and close the year in the general ledger closing screen. Also, there's an additional step on the AP side, and that's closing the 1099 calendar year. That's going to roll the two open 1099 years forward 1 year for you. We'll discuss that in a little more detail coming up. So the 1099 calendar year control screen is what's used to maintain the 2 open 1099 years that SL allows you to have at any given time. 1099 amounts can be manually updated using initialize mode, and then you would go into the vendor maintenance screen on the 1099 info tab. So if you happen to find any 1099 amounts that are incorrect, just go into initialize mode, go to vendor maintenance, and then the 1099 info tab. 1099 amounts are calculated based on the check date that pays the voucher that's coded with a 1099 box number. The AP integrity check screen, there's an option in there to rebuild 1099 amounts. Be advised that this only works when the vendors were properly coded as 1099 vendors and also had vouchers that were properly coded with 1099 box numbers. So such setup changes are not retroactive. So if you would happen to find, months into the year after several checks have been issued to the vendor that they were not marked as a 1099 vendor, marking them at that time is not going to retroactively set those other payments that were made to them as 1099 amounts. So just be advised of that. There's a 1099 preview report that will show you all vendors that are marked as 1099 vendors, regardless of the amounts that were paid to them. Now, the 1099 forms report is only going to print for those vendors that hit the limit specified and that require a form to be printed for them. So preview shows all vendors flagged as a 1099 vendor, regardless of amounts. The forms is only printing for those that hit the limit. Now, 1099 amounts are updated throughout the year. So as a voucher that's been coded with a 1099 box number gets paid, again, the vendor must also be flagged as a 1099 vendor. But as those vouchers are paid that has the 1099 box number on it, the check date determines the 1099 year to update. There's no extra processes required to print the 1099 forms or even the preview report. There's no calculation process that you run or anything like that. You only need to run a process if you're generating an electronic file for sending to the IRS. As far as printing the 1099, you would go into Accounts Payable, go to Reports, and then click the 1099 Forms Report. You can preview using that preview that I mentioned, or if you want to print the actual 1099 forms, it would be the 1099 Form Report. Either of those you can print as many times as needed. And as I mentioned before, preview shows all 1099 vendors regardless of the limit, and 1099 forms will only print for those vendors that have hit the limit. SL allows us to have 2 1099 years open at any given time. Typically, the prior year is left open and the current year is open. So for example, maybe 2018 would remain open as well as 2019. And then as you roll into the 2020 year, we would roll the 1099 years so that we have 2019 and 2020 then as the 2 open years. Printing 1099s, there's ability to print those forms for either of the 2 open years. The oldest year is the one that it defaults to. So if we had 2018 and 2019 as the 2 open years, by default, the 1099 form report would try to print for 2018. There's an options tab I'll show you here in a bit. We have to select the next 1099 year, so it reads the later of the 2 years. This here is the option. This is on the 1099 forms report on the options tab, and it's the next 1099 year. So again, if you have 2018 and 2019 as the 2 open years, by default, the forms will print for 2018, the older of the 2 years. We would need to check this box to get it to print for the 2019 year. If your 2 calendar years that you have open are 2019 and 2020, selecting this checkbox would not be required as it would default to printing them for 2019. The 1099 year-end closing, I guess. So this is the 1099 calendar year control screen, which is going to be used to purge the oldest 1099 year and roll them forward 1 year. This must be done to be able to print checks for a given year. SL will only allow you to print checks for the 2 open years that you have specified here. So if we left this with 2018 and 2019 as our 2 open years, you would be able to print your forms as needed for 2019, but when you go try to print a check with a check date that has a 2020 date on it, you would receive a message indicating that it's not an open 1099 year. So it would force you to purge the oldest year. So by selecting the process option of Purge Oldest Year, you would just click on Begin Processing, and this process gets rid of the oldest year information, cycles the vendors to the next year, it leaves the new year open. So it would change us if I did begin processing on here, my current 1099 year would become 2019, next year would become 2020. If you determine that the 1099 information is not accurate, maybe it was a scenario where a vendor wasn't flagged as a 1099 vendor when they should have been, or maybe a voucher was keyed in and it wasn't coded with the 1099 box number and it got paid. Changes to those sort of things will impact the system going forward, but it's not retroactive. We are able to edit these amounts on a vendor-by-vendor basis in the vendor maintenance screen using initialize mode. So your user would need to have access to initialize mode in the vendor maintenance screen. You would get into initialize mode and then open the vendor maintenance screen, pull up your vendor, and click on the 1099 info tab. You would then notice that the 2 boxes under the 2 calendar years, I have 2019 highlighted, but all those amount fields beneath it become enabled. If you are not in initialize mode or you load the screen and maybe you think you're in initialize mode, but you come in here and these fields are disabled, that would indicate that your user doesn't have initialize mode access. So you might need to log in as a different user. But initialize mode enables these boxes that are typically disabled and allows you to correct any 1099 amounts that you might need to. The forms that we print pull directly from these boxes here. So whatever you key in is what's going to pull onto the forms when you print them. The Generate 1099 electronic file screen is what's used to create the file containing the 1099 amounts that will be submitted electronically to the IRS. You can generate for either of the 2 open 1099 years. You'll notice in my screenshot here, the top left corner has calendar years 2018 and 2019 appearing. You would want to make sure you select your 2019 year. Some fields required on this window include the vendor PIN number. Actually, let me back up 1 minute here. The bottom of the window also has the output path. That's the field that I mentioned. Just make note of where you're saving that file to, because that's the file that you are then going to submit to the IRS. So just make note of where you're putting that. This tab here, though, the transmitter tab, has some additional fields that are required. So we have the vendor PIN number and contact information, so that if there are any questions on the file that are submitted, they have someone to reach out to. The control code on the top of this screen, this comes from the IRS. Most of the information, though, will populate from the company maintenance screen in SL, but you can change that here before generating the file if you need to. So just double check that the information is accurate before you do that. Now, some common 1099 processing issues here. Probably a big one is the system message 532. This can be received when trying to print checks in accounts payable if the check date year is not yet an open 1099 year. So you would want to go back and use the 1099 calendar year control screen to purge the oldest year. Make sure that the date of your check, the year on that date, is one of the open 1099 years. If you find the 1099 balances are incorrect for a vendor, just go ahead and use initialize mode, correct them in the vendor maintenance screen. Make sure that you're correcting any setup issues, though, for the upcoming new year, so that doesn't continue to be an issue for you. And if the current 1099 year was maybe purged too many times or too early by mistake, you can contact your partner or support for assistance with some SQL updates that can be used to reset those years and rebuild the 1099 amounts for those years. So just be cautious when you do that purge, and don't do a double click, or maybe someone else already ran it. Just double check before you go in there and click begin processing. So that wraps up everything I've got. If there's any questions, feel free to submit those and we'll begin reviewing them now. I do see one regarding tax table updates. Are those included with the year-end updates? So no, those will be provided separately. So while the year-end updates are this year going to be dependent on the tax table updates, they will likely be 2 separate downloads. So make sure you're looking for both of those. And just a follow-up note worth mentioning on that, I could foresee a call generator, someone having questions regarding this, just simply being that, you've applied the year-end updates and maybe an employee is set with one of the new filing statuses that require those higher tax table rates, but the employee is not calculating when you run calculations. So it might give you some sort of a error message or event log indicating that the deduction does not specify a payroll table. That would indicate that those tax table updates had not yet been loaded. So just remember those year-end updates are dependent on the payroll tax table updates being installed this year. This has never been the case in the past, but it's very important this year with those changes to the W-4 form. I got an inquiry on ACA reports. So Standard Dynamics SL does not include functionality regarding the ACA reporting. Any other questions?
Okay. Well, I don't think we have any more questions, so thank you everybody for attending the webinar today. If you do have any other questions, please email us at sisn.com. There's an email address for Debbie Peavy right there, dpv@sisn.com. Thank you everybody for attending our education series here for December, and I appreciate everybody's time. And everybody have a very happy holiday, and we'll see you next year, and we'll send out an email letting you know what our next educational series, probably sometime in January. Everybody have a great day. Thank you very much.